Hey everybody, it's Chuck Dixon back for another drive time where I keep you company while you mow the lawn. Apparently, somebody told me recently, listen to me while they're doing yard work. So watch out, man. Don't be changing the blade on the lawnmower while it's running. Uh, so, and some of you on your commute to or from work or on the job in your office cubicle or workstation or on the assembly line or wherever it is you listen to this. Um, I'm here to keep you company and talk to you. I mentioned my dad in an earlier drive time, and a whole bunch of you said, you'd like to hear more about him. Well, coincidentally, maybe, this past Sunday, I was left to my own devices in the house. Everybody was busy doing something else or out of the house. And I thought, well, let me put on this Masters of the Air, this TV miniseries about the B-17 crews during World War II, and the part they played in destroying the Nazi war machine. And man, I was impressed. I was a little trepidatious about watching it because it's it's modern TV shows and movies. There's always something in there to make you cringe. This did not. This was an amazing, amazing miniseries, brutally frank about what these guys went through and all the rest of it. It was particularly touching to me because so much of it reflected not only what I've read about this period of history, but what my dad told me. My dad was a bombardier on a B-17 over Europe. He was a tech sergeant in U.S. Army Air Corps, and he would tell us stories about a lot of his experiences. Not all of his experiences, and not all of his experiences in first person. I'll explain more on that in a bit. My dad was a depression kid. He quit school at 13, so he wasn't a high school dropout. He was a junior high school dropout. He quit school at 13 during the Depression because he was the oldest of six siblings. He had two brothers and three sisters, and his dad took off. Apparently, my granddad was a bit of a ne'er do well. He was a journeyman car mechanic who did a lot of journeying because he ripped people off. So basically, he would get in a whole lot of trouble ripping people off for car repairs, overcharging them, not doing what he said he was going to do, and all the rest. And he would always have to eventually take off, which meant my dad and his brothers and sisters and my grandmother would have to move a lot. They started out in the Carolinas, wound up in West Virginia, ultimately wound up in Philadelphia, where he abandoned them. They never saw him again. So my dad went to work doing everything. You know, it's like a Little Orphan Annie story. He had a shoe shine thing. He sold newspapers on the corner. He was a roofer. At 13, he was nailing shingles on a roof in the dead of winter. Eventually, he taught himself about to be an electrician, and he got jobs at hardware stores, and ultimately got a job at a local vaudeville theater, where he met a whole lot of celebrities, including Red Skelton. And it's also where he learned a talent from a cowboy star that I'll talk about a little bit later. That's called a teaser, folks. So anyway, he was Army Air Corps. He, like so many other American guys, Monday morning, day after Pearl Harbor, went down to the recruiting offices, stood in line. First, he wanted to get into the cavalry because he thought he'd actually get to ride a horse. My dad was a longtime Western fan, as I will confirm later, as I said. He tried to get into the paratroopers, but he was too tall at 6 foot. The Army Rangers had not begun as a program yet. Their minimum height was 6 foot. Thank God he didn't become a Ranger. I probably wouldn't have been born. He went everywhere trying to get into the different services. His eyesight was poor. He was farsighted. And his last stop was the Army Air Corps. And he was told that 6 feet was too tall because you had to fit into an airplane. And 6 feet at the time was tall. It was real tall. I realize now it's pretty much average height. It's close to average height. But then it was tall. He was a tall guy, despite, being malnourished throughout the entire Depression. Probably would have been 6'10" if he'd been properly fed. Anyway, he wanted to get, this was his last stop, Army Air Corps, man. He wanted to be in the fight. So he, during the height measurement, he crouched down a little, got himself under 6 feet. And for the eye test, he memorized the eye chart while the doctor was out of the room. My dad could do things like that. He was great at just memorizing numbers, letters, random patterns. And he memorized the eye chart and passed the test. And he got into the Army Air Corps, was sent to training in Texas and Colorado, qualified to be a bombardier. This guy who couldn't see his hand in front of his face without a set of glasses was put in charge of the bomb site, the Norden bomb site, which turned out to be quite fortuitous. I think God's hand is in everything. So he became a bombardier, trained in the Norden bomb site. The Norden bomb site was America's true secret weapon. It was the greatest secret of World War II after the Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb. We didn't share the Norden bomb site with any of our allies. The way it worked, it was a computing marvel. It took into account the rotation of the Earth when helping you fix on a target. It is the reason why B-17 strikes were as accurate as they were. Now, my dad actually plays a part in the history of the Norden bomb site. When he was training with it in Texas, they're doing dummy bomb runs with sacks of flour. And this, junior high school dropout, no formal education, but an incredible mechanical mind, which I did not inherit. Incredible mechanical mind saw a few problems with the Norden bomb site, mechanical problems, that he thought if they could be fixed, they would make the bomb site far more accurate. Just, springs and gears kind of stuff. And he mentioned it to his CO. His CO said, well, write a letter and I'll push it up the chain. So my dad wrote a letter, did some drawings describing the changes, the alterations that needed to be made to the bomb site, sent them up the chain, and somebody looked at them and said, you know what, this kid's right. These changes would help. And so they altered the Norden bomb site. So Norden bomb site production was changed after my dad's suggestions were put in place, and my dad was given the Silver Star for that achievement. This is something we did not know about until after he died, because my dad was a very humble man, not brag about himself at all. And a number of other things that we learned after he died about his experiences in World War II. And this is what he was a crew member on, B-17. He was up in the nose. The bombardier, in case you don't know anything about B-17s, when they reach what they called the initial point, which was they were nearing the target, they were within minutes of being over the target in the Ruhr Valley or the Netherlands or Norway, some of the missions my dad was on. The pilot would put the plane on autopilot and hand control over to the bombardier as far as airspeed, things like that. And the bombardier, my dad in this case, was effectively flying the plane until the bombs were dropped, and then he ceded control back to the pilot. In some cases, on some missions, none that my dad was on that I'm aware of, the bombardier would continue piloting the plane if the pilot and co-pilot were put out of commission by either flak or fire from enemy fighters. So anyway, a highly technical position for a guy who didn't graduate high school. But this was the World War II generation. They did what they had to do. You may do with what you had to do, and for whatever reason, my dad was put in that place, and did an effective job. He was stationed in England at Dover, and within striking distance of London. Went into London on a bunch of leaves and things like that. And here he is in the back row, all the way to the right, and he's in his full gear, full flight gear, including the leather outfit that these guys would wear, the flight suits. that had electric heating devices, battery operated electric heating devices, which for some reason don't appear in that series, Masters of the Air. They never mention them because, man, it got cold. The series does mention how freaking cold it got. Guys, having to be treated by frostbite, crippling frostbite from these flights, because the B-17 was armored, but it was not insulated. And many times, even at 10,000 feet, it was flying with, waste gun ports open. I mean, incredibly cold Arctic air coming in. And so they would wear these leather jumpsuits, flight suits that had heating elements in them. And so training, my dad went all through training. Training was, months and months and months of training to get these guys skilled for these jobs and help them to survive. And survival was a thing. I mean, the attrition rate of B-17 bomber crews was horrifying, probably only rivaled by the attrition rate amongst submarine crews. There were missions over Europe where nobody came back. So you're looking at, there was a mission raid. I believe it was Schweinfurt, Germany, which my dad said was the deadliest place to visit. The ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt, where the combined bomber groups suffered 85% casualties. That means almost every plane was shot down. Almost every crew was lost, either taken prisoner or died. And my dad did talk about, I'll talk about that in a minute. But now, the cowboy star that he met when he was doing lighting as a teenager in a vaudeville theater taught him how to throw a lariat, how to do all those rope tricks. My dad, even when I was a kid, could still do that. He'd get a rope, any old rope, make himself a lasso, and he'd be able to, do all those things you see, experienced lariat guys do, spinning it and leaping in and out of it, making it go up and down his body, having it just hover, and he could toss that thing and catch anything. And because he had this talent, it led to his nickname, a nickname that would follow him the rest of his life. One of their officers came through the barracks one time when the guys were off duty and said, "Are there any cowboys here?" And they're like, "What? Are there any cowboys? Anybody? Any of you guys cowboys back in the States?" And like, "No, we're not cowboys." Somebody said, "Why?" And the officer said, "Well, there's a local nobleman, and he wants to meet an American cowboy. You'll get to go to dinner at his estate, and then you'll entertain him and his guests after dinner." So my dad raised his hand and said, "Well, I can do rope tricks. I can pretend to be a cowboy." And he said, "Okay, you got the job." They always say in the Army, never volunteer. But who wouldn't volunteer for that? You get off base and get a good meal and meet some interesting folks. So he went and he entertained these people after dinner doing his rope tricks, and they were very, very pleased. When he got back to base, of course, he was going to be up for teasing. So the minute he got back from base, somebody said, "Oh, welcome back, Duke." And that was his name for the rest of his life, was Duke. A lot of people later in life thought it was because he was a big fan of John Wayne, which he was, but that wasn't the source of the name Duke. And but he never told anybody the story. All the people that he worked with. I worked with him for a while when he worked at Burroughs Computers. No, I didn't work with him. I was on the assembly line. He was in the mechanic shop doing actual important work, skilled work. I was probably there's probably a NASA rocket launch that didn't go off because of some of my soldering. Anyway, a lot of people that worked there, they talk about, "Oh, Duke this, Duke that," and they would talk about he was a big John Wayne fan. I said, "Well, that's not where he got the name." I would tell all these people they'd never heard the story. He never told them. Like I said, a humble guy. Now, another thing that my dad ran into, noteworthy, Clark Gable was in my dad's unit. My dad played softball with Clark Gable. Had a lot of conversations with Clark Gable. Rode into London on the train one time with Clark Gable and a bunch of other guys. Gable, king of Hollywood, highest paid actor in the world, most world famous movie star, you know, of his era, joined the Army Air Corps, and he wanted to fly combat missions. And I know I'm off on a tangent, but this is my show. He wanted to fly combat missions. And of course, MGM did not want him flying combat missions because he was worth so much money. But he went through training and everything else. He became an officer, went through officer training school, even though he was a little too old. He was 41 when he joined. He became a lieutenant, but he couldn't qualify to be a pilot. He kept washing out as a pilot. So he became the highest ranking waist gunner on a B-17 ever. And he went on a bunch of promotional tours. MGM got a cinematographer, a screenwriter, and an editor enlisted with him. So he had this film unit. And that's what Army Air Corps wanted, and that's what Hollywood wanted, was him doing promotional rah-rah war bond kind of stuff. But Gable wasn't satisfied with that, and he raised such a fuss when he got to England that they allowed him to fly 5 combat missions. Now, my dad was a staunch defender of Gable because he met Gable, and he said he was a real guy. Okay, Gable got invited to parties, got invited everywhere when he was in England, never went, never left the base. My dad tells a story of when Bob Hope came to entertain the guys at the base. Hope was up on stage. Gable was in a Jeep seated at the back of the crowd. And Hope kept teasing Gable and teasing him and making jokes about him to get him to come up on stage. And Gable wouldn't do it because he didn't want to seem like he was any more privileged or special than any of the guys he served with. And so anyway, Gable flew 5 missions, and my dad always defended him because a lot of critics said, well, they were milk runs. Well, as my dad said, you never knew what was a milk run. You didn't know when you went flying over the Netherlands or wherever that you weren't going to get shot down or seriously wounded or set on fire. Fire was a big danger on these B-17s. And it wasn't until Gable's 5th mission when a round of flak came up through the belly of the plane and out through the ceiling, knocked Gable flying, and miraculously did not go off. The shell just went through the ship, just tore a hole through the ship, top to bottom. And afterwards, when Gable recovered from his shock, realized that the shell had come close enough to knock the heel off of his service boot. Well, that's when MGM said, that's enough. This guy can't fly combat missions anymore. Now, he flew officially 5 combat missions. My dad always insisted that he flew 8. And I did a little bit of research and found out that my dad was right, that Gable snuck onto planes to take combat missions a few more times before they finally ordered him home. And so my dad got to meet Clark Gable. Not only got to meet him, got to spend, significant time talking to him and everything else. Said he was an awesome guy, just an awesome dude. Now, another famous or infamous incident that my dad told us about. We loved this story when I was a kid. He never told us the end until we were adults, though. A B-17 came up from North Africa, and on it, they needed extensive maintenance when they got back from North Africa because their engine cowlings were full of sand. And so one of the things they brought back with them was this monkey. And my dad's unit adopted the monkey and basically put my dad in charge of the monkey. So my dad was responsible for the monkey. His name was Murgatroyd. And there's lots of pictures of my dad with Murgatroyd. Not one picture of my dad with Clark Gable. Always gave him a hard time about that. Yeah, lots of pictures of the monkey, no pictures of you with the King of Hollywood. Anyway, so Murgatroyd became somewhat of a problem when he got into the briefing room where they drew on the big map, the big board, and they would draw on the board in red, white, and blue chalk. And Murgatroyd ate all the chalk and then went back to the barracks. He had free reign of the base, went back to the barracks and crapped all over everything. He got like projectile diarrhea in red, white, and blue. It just crapped over, bunks, footlockers, ceilings, walls, floors. My dad said it was a nightmare, absolute nightmare. And so that's where his story would stop when we were kids, about how everybody was really mad at him because his monkey, made a mess in the barracks. When we were adults, he told us the rest of the story, that the guys got together, handed my dad a 45 automatic and said, "You got to take care of that monkey." So my dad had to take Murgatroyd out back, put him out of his misery. So, but he spared us that story. But still no pictures of him and Gable. Now, it wasn't until now my dad would tell stories, and he would tell a little bit about combat, but never first person. It was always a guy told me, or this happened to a guy, and he would talk about how a guy told him that a plane um, planes would just disintegrate in air. They would get hit in the wrong place by a flak round, and the plane would just vanish, and just pieces of the plane be flying everywhere, and no time to bail out. One story he did share with us was during training. Um, he got into a bit of a panic on an early flight, and he was poised at a hatch, ready to go out, with his parachute harness strap over one arm. He thought, "I'll jump out and put it on the rest of the way during the fall." And the flight surgeon said, "Hey, first of all, they landed safely. There was no need for panic. Everybody on the flight was scared because the plane had hit treetops during its flight mission. Afterwards, there were branches stuck in the engine cowling. That's how close this thing came to crashing." And so my dad had a right to be a bit panicked, but the flight surgeon said, "Never do that. Take the time, put the harness on all the way." He goes, "If you leapt out with that harness over one arm, you either would have lost the parachute or it would have torn your arm off." So my dad learned that lesson. But anyway, he would talk about things in combat, and various things that would happen on missions in third person. We found out after he died that all those things happened to him. All those things were eyewitness accounts, but he sort of softened the blow for himself. My dad did suffer, like so many World War II vets, from PTSD, although it didn't have a name then. My dad would wake up screaming nightmares when I was a kid. We moved our first house, single home that my parents bought, was directly behind a firehouse. And the first night the siren went off, my mom said she found my dad under the bed, because my dad had, been through air raids, both in London during the Blitz and on his base. And so he did suffer from PTSD. Also suffered from a bleeding ulcer, which is what ultimately sent him home. He flew only 24 of his required 25 missions because he was throwing up blood, a condition that continued until I was a kid when he finally got operated on and got surgery to remove the ulcer. But anyway, I mean, so much of this stuff we found about him after he died, and a lot of it we found out when we tried to, well, we successfully, mostly my sister did this, filled out all the paperwork and all the requirements, all the protocol to have my dad's remains buried at Arlington. And in doing that, she filled out the forms and got a bunch of records in exchange, and also stuff we went through. I went through all my dad's papers and found a lot. We found about the Silver Star. We found a lot of the stuff about what he had done. So we finally learned his full military record. That he was a decorated World War II combat veteran, something he never made a big deal out of. Never, because so many other guys, he just thought, all these other guys did that too. And I remember, I mean, I'm just remembering stuff as I'm talking about him. I remember that he said that he was sent home early, he was sent home before the war was over. And at the time, you were allowed to wear your uniform for 3 days after you got home. After you were mustered out, you could be allowed to wear the uniform for 3 days, basically, so you didn't have to pay for a meal or a drink anywhere or a newspaper for 3 days. Everybody was treating you, everybody's patting you on the back. But he said after those 3 days was up, here he was in civilian gear, just civilian clothing, and he said that it was very, very uncomfortable because he was very conscious that people were looking at him, going, "Why aren't you over there?" And my dad wasn't about to say, "Hey, I already was over there. I already did my part." But he said he had a few rough times on city buses, people giving him a hard time because he wasn't in uniform. But anyway, there's probably a million other stories I could tell you. I just can't remember them right now. But he was my dad. He was an awesome guy, absolutely awesome guy. And maybe Father's Day I'll tell some stories about him beyond the service. Man, I sure wish I had a picture of him with Clark Gable to show you. Anyway, that's it for drive time. I hope I kept you entertained. Hope I saw you through, what is it now? A little over 25 minutes of your working day or drive time. And I'll see all of you down the road.